So, the story in the book is, as you've already kind of alluded to, Anthony, about a lot of the friction that I encountered, with the president. I talk about the 3 A's of, allies, Afghanistan, and authoritarians, where we had different perspectives. But really, he was aligned. We were all aligned, in a lot of critical areas, like burden sharing, for example, among alliances. Hey, getting our allies to invest more in defense, that strengthens alliances. But then, of course, with Donald Trump, he takes it a step further and says, okay, I'm not going to defend you if you don't pay up, which psychologically weakens, the alliance and could encourage Vladimir Putin. So again, this is the theme of helping Donald Trump disrupt what needed to be disrupted. And what was most effective, Anthony, was we modified kind of the way we would interact with him based on the way he learns, the way he thinks.
Okay, so joining us now on Open Book, a dear friend and somebody I have the pleasure of interviewing before, is General H.R.McMaster. The title of the book is At War with Ourselves. What a great title, H.R. My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House. And so this is, of course, after 34 years of service in the U.S. military. And I want to start there, if you don't mind. I was in London, and somebody said to me, I listened to Open Book. I said, oh, thank you. Are you going to interview General McMaster? I said, geez, I hope so. I'm going to use my Italian guilt on him. I said, well, make sure you bring up, there's a very famous tank battle that he was involved in Iraq, and he was a phenomenal tank commander. So I want to start there. Tell us about your military career. Tell us how you got involved with tanks. And let's start there. Then we'll go to the academic. You write about the Long Island Anthony in your book and the Harvard Anthony. Let's go to the military HR first before we get to the academic HR.
Yeah. Hey, Anthony, thanks for having me, man. I mean, I always enjoy talking with you about anything. And thanks for the privilege of talking with you about the book. And, I always wanted to be in the Army, and I was just, always determined to go to West Point. I graduated from West Point. I was not the ideal cadet, at West Point. I was sometimes misunderstood and a victim of circumstance there as a cadet, but I couldn't wait to lead soldiers, to build teams that, are part of missions bigger than themselves, and teams that kind of become like a family. A good Army unit's like a family. And you're bound together by mutual trust, common purpose, your sense of honor. And what we saw in combat in Desert Storm is our Eagle Troop of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. We were bound together like a family. And it's really a bond of affection almost. And your sense of honor, like you fear letting the soldier down next to you more than you fear the enemy, or enemy bullets. And what we did is we encountered a much larger force, 8-10 times our size, in the middle of a sandstorm. It was a Republican Guard unit. We attacked because we got a jump on them. If you think about like a boxing analogy, like we stung them with our left. The right option is to follow with your right and knock them out. And that's what we did in about a 23-minute battle. We destroyed 50 some armored vehicles in those 23 minutes, hundreds of trucks, hundreds of infantry. Later, we took hundreds of prisoners, and we suffered no casualties in our troop, thank God. So, what gave us the power to do that, Anthony, was confidence in who we are as a team, confidence in each other. We did kind of what we expected, and our soldiers were so well trained, Anthony. I mean, some of them after the battle, they said, my tank loader, he said, I ain't gonna lie, sir, I was fixing to panic. But I said, don't panic, just do your job, and he fell back on his training. And so I was so proud of those guys. And it's the kind of teamwork, that you want to in any organization. And you saw me trying to build that kind of teamwork within our NSC staff in the White House years later.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I think you know this, and I know this. I know this from my my business career. We have to build a team. Reagan had a great line on his desk that you can get anywhere you want in life as long as you don't care who gets the credit. I think we both know that line well. Yeah. And we've tried to live by that. The book you're writing is about a war with ourselves, but some of it is actually a war with Donald Trump. And it is because he's a team of one. You know that. I know that. You're more or less right about that.
Yeah, not a team builder.
Not a team builder. And so how do you you're trying to help somebody who's a team of one, and so it's hard to talk to him, right? Because you experienced this. I witnessed you in my 11 short days experiencing this with him, where you're trying to talk to him. He may not know something, but he doesn't want you to know that he doesn't know something. He certainly doesn't want you to tell him in front of other people the differences in political sex in the Middle East, or what various historical treaties mean to different areas of the world.
Yeah.
And so you're in a minefield. But before we get there, I want to talk about managing that minefield in a second. But before we get there, let's talk about the call that comes in from Katie Walsh, someone I know well. She's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Reince Priebus. General Flynn is being replaced after 2.1 Scaramucci's. All right, so he's blown out after 23 days. And I knew Mike, and I sat next to Mike during the transition. I was across the hallway. We each had our own conference rooms. You know, we were both on the executive transition committee. And I don't want to say anything disparaging about Mike, but I think he's lost his way at this point. And I know you like him, and you can give me your opinion if you want. But he's leaving. You're coming in. What do you say to your wife, Katie? What do you tell me about the transition from private citizen, or I guess no, excuse me, you were still active in the military. So tell me about the transition from military work into the civilian job inside the White House.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Mike Flynn was a friend of mine all through the Army. Fantastic officer. I don't know what happened, Anthony, and he sort of got caught up on all these conspiracy theories and encouraging, Anyway, I don't know. So,
it's sort of like,
and I think he got kind of screwed.
With me. I like Rudy. He helped me early in my career. Right. I don't like saying disparaging things about him now, even though he's lost the plot.
That's right. So, hey, that phone call I tell the story in At War with Ourselves. I'm walking down the street in Walnut Street in my hometown of Philadelphia. Where's my Phillies hat, man? Sorry, no offense to anyone in New York.
Now we got to do this.
So I'm walking down, walking the street in my hometown of Philadelphia.
It's so painful for me as a Mets fan. But keep going.
My phone rings. It was Katie Walsh, and Katie, Katie says, "Hey, can you go to Mar-a-Lago tomorrow?" This was the Friday of President's Day weekend. And so this is one of those phone calls that changes your life. And, I'd had a few of these. I mean, I was a fellow at Stanford University, at the Hoover Institution for War College, and we're about to invade Iraq. And I get a phone call that I'm going to the Middle East, So I called my wife, Katie, well, and said, "Hey, I got this phone call." She said, "Of course you have to do it." I mean, she's the same way that I thought about it. This was my, 7th commander in chief, that had served across my career. How do you not do your duty, And so I go down to Mar-a-Lago. I winds up being a Sunday of President's Day weekend. I have the interview with President Trump that day, and I describe the interview, our interactions, the questions he's asking, and everything. And then he holds me over for a second interview on Monday. There had been a down select from the 4 candidates. I didn't know who was still a candidate until I ran into John Bolton in the men's room, kind of awkwardly, Ambassador General, and then I walked down into the living room of Mar-a-Lago. The president meets me, goes, "Hey, there's not going to be another interview. I'm hiring you." He announced it. I fly back on Air Force One to Washington. I didn't live in Washington, Anthony. I lived down in Tidewater, Virginia. They fly me down to pack a bag, and I start work Tuesday afternoon. So it was an abrupt change into like a significant job, obviously, but I considered it my duty, but also a privilege, to serve in that position and to help what I regarded as a disruptive president disrupt a lot of what needed to be disrupted in Washington, Anthony. That's what Donald Trump tapped into, is the belief on the part of a lot of Americans that Washington elites had abandoned them, and it had pursued strategies in a foreign policy area and national security area as well that just weren't working for the country or for them.
Okay, and we both agree with that. And I've said this to you. You and I have talked privately about him seeing the desperation in blue-collar America that other elite politicians didn't see, or career politicians. And I think it's an important part of our future story, how we heal that fissure, if you will, in the body politic of the country. But I want to talk about something that you address in the book, which is that we do get a lot of things right. We form NATO.
Sure.
We have strategic alliances around the world. Yeah. We're trying to reject terrorism. We're trying to find ways around the world to combat terrorism, keep people in the free world safe, and keep them free. And so talk to me, if you will, and you write about it beautifully in the book, about things we're getting right, things that we needed to change, like there's a wrecking ball approach, General McMaster, but then there's also a version 2.0 of software where there's a gunk in the system that needs to be changed. So So tell us a little bit about that. Do we need to wreck everything, or are there certain institutions that are vital that need modification? Where are you on this stuff? And more or less what you've written in the book.
So, the story in the book is, as you've already kind of alluded to, Anthony, about a lot of the friction that I encountered, with the president. I talk about the 3 A's of, allies, Afghanistan, and authoritarians, where we had different perspectives. But really, he was aligned. We were all aligned, in a lot of critical areas, like burden sharing, for example, among alliances. Hey, getting our allies to invest more in defense, that strengthens alliances. But then, of course, with Donald Trump, he takes it a step further and says, okay, I'm not going to defend you if you don't pay up, which psychologically weakens, the alliance and could encourage Vladimir Putin. So again, this is the theme of helping Donald Trump disrupt what needed to be disrupted. And what was most effective, Anthony, was we modified kind of the way we would interact with him based on the way he learns, the way he thinks. And what he likes to do is challenge the assumptions of the past. So, hey, what about the assumption that China, having been welcomed into the international order, would play by the rules? And as China prospered, it would liberalize its economy and liberalize its form of governance. That was the main assumption that underpinned U.S. policy toward China since the end of the Cold War. Hey, it's a false assumption. And because it was implicit, it was never really challenged. So we challenged it, and we helped Donald Trump put into place, I think, the most significant shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, Anthony. And that's one that the Biden administration has carried on. It's an element of continuity. We dramatically changed our approach to the Middle East and to Iran. And the value of a lot of Donald Trump's decisions, especially that one, only became apparent to many Americans until the Biden administration reversed it, and went back to the Obama approach of trying to conciliate the Ayatollah, and the Iranians, and that didn't work. And I think in many ways it encouraged the conflagrations we see in the region, as well as the horrendous attacks of October 7th of last year. So I think that was another big shift. We began to rebuild our defense to address a bow wave of deferred military modernization. We put 180-degree shifts in place on Venezuela. Again, Biden administration reversed that. How did that work out? This conciliatory approach to these groups, even the Houthis, they undesignated the Houthis as a terrorist organization. So I think that in many ways, his policies were solid from a foreign policy perspective. But in others, he would make a tough decision, Anthony, but then he couldn't keep that decision. And I'm thinking in particular about the South Asia strategy and Afghanistan in particular.
Yeah. So I'm going to test a few things on you. Never really talked about in the mainstream media. I don't bring them up, and I'm just curious to get your reaction. So some would say that the move of the embassy, he was told by the State Department not to move it. He was told by secular Jews not to move it. The Orthodox community wanted him to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And people say that there was a dramatic increase in Hamas funding and other terrorist organization funding after that. Do you believe that, or do you believe that that movement of the embassy had no impact?
I believe it had no impact, Anthony.
Okay.
And the reason I think that the increase in Hamas funding and Hezbollah funding was the Biden administration not enforcing the Trump era sanctions. Once those sanctions hit, the Iranians cut under Trump. They cut their stipends in half. So hey, the other thing to remember is multiple presidents going back to Bill Clinton said they're going to move the embassy, and Congress. I think it passed with 49 out of 50 votes in the Senate to do it. It's just no president had the guts to do it. It's one of the good things about Trump is hey, he'll do stuff like that, But what we did, Anthony, I tell the story in the book is, rather than just make that decision impulsively, we brought that into the National Security Council decision-making process, and we did our best to mitigate the downside and protect against the risk, associated with it. Now, anyway, it's more complicated than that, but the story's in the book about how we did it and how we helped the president, in this case, I think make the right decision on that. Now, what I would have loved is maybe something else associated with it, like holding out the potential for a portion of East Jerusalem to be maybe a future, capital in a Palestinian state. There could have been other, mitigating factors that the president decided against. But hey, I didn't get elected. He got elected, right? So I gave him the options, got him the advice. He made the decision. And this is an area where the cabinet all moved out. Like the Secretary of State and Defense, they recommended against it initially, but then they did their best to implement the president's decision, which is the way it should be.
Okay, let me try another one on you. Okay, that's great that you refuted that. What about the slowdown of armaments to the Ukraine? Something that he was impeached for, frankly.
Right.
Was space created as a result of Donald Trump's decision-making and this unexplained love affair with Vladimir Putin, which, frankly, you write about? You can't figure out what the love affair was. I certainly can't. Yeah. I can't even speculate what it was. But the theory that he slowed down the arms. We had this Operation Porcupine since 1994, fortify the Ukraine to protect the Ukraine, some form of deterrence. He slowed down the arms. NATO seemed fractured. We're going to go for his first NATO speech at the first NATO summit in a second. Putin said, hey, we got an opening here. This NATO thing is in disarray. The Americans have slowed down their arms shipments. Let me attack Ukraine. Or you don't believe that?
Well, I think it was wrong.
Tell me what you think.
Hey, I think it was wrong for him to suspend arms shipments to the Ukrainians to get dirt on the Bidens, to use in the election. But hey, Anthony, I think what green-lighted the Russian invasion was the fecklessness of the Biden administration, demonstrated with the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan, responsibility for which is shared with the Trump administration too. And I write about that. I criticize both administrations on it. But hey, when that happened, when August of 2021 in Kabul happened, I think China and Russia said, these guys are over. They've surrendered to a terrorist organization, or at least defeated themselves. And remember the joint statement before the Beijing Olympics, Anthony, where they're like, hey, you're done. We're in charge now. It's the new era of international relations. I think that's what led to the reinvasion. And the Biden administration, I would say, they pulled our ships out of the Black Sea. The Biden administration suspended weapon shipments to Ukraine too, to allay Putin's security concerns. We listed all the things we wouldn't do to support Ukraine. We evacuated and scuttled our embassy, right? And took all of our advisors out. And then we offered Zelensky a ride out of the place. I mean, to me, that looks like we almost green-lighted the invasion. So I think, the story I tell in the book about bringing the decision to President Trump to provide javelins to Ukraine the first time, the point I was trying to make to him, and I describe how we did it with the chart and everything, is that what provokes Putin is the perception of weakness. Trump got that, but then he doesn't stick with it a lot of times, depending on who's in his ear, whether it's Rand Paul or whoever it is. Some of the kind of the retrenchers or neo-isolationist wings of the Republican Party. Anyway, there are a lot of stories in the book about Ukraine and his evolution of his approach toward Russia. And I'm concerned about this. Is one of the areas I'm concerned about, in a second Trump administration, is would he sustain that support? What I'm hearing about these, so-called peace plans would be a gift to Putin and misunderstand Putin again. Putin won't stop unless he is physically stopped in terms of his aggression, not only against Ukraine, but against Europe and the West in general.
What do you think it is? If you had to speculate, never says a bad word about Putin, always praises Putin, tells people during an invasion how smart Putin is. Yeah. What do you think it is?
Well, there's a couple things. I want to hear what you think maybe too, Anthony, because I'm sure you got thoughts on this. But I think overall, he fancies himself as like the great negotiator, right? And if you want to negotiate with somebody, one of the techniques, right? We learned this in getting to yes, man. In negotiation mediation theory, you separate the relationship from the negotiation and you try to build a good relationship. That's one big part of it. He wants the big deal. I think that's one big part. Also, I think he sees authoritarian leaders regarded by their populations in the way he wants to be regarded, right? As a strong man. And then the third aspect of this, is he really wants to do what's right for the country in some areas. Like he's really worried about like the nuclear arms race, nuclear instability. And he thinks, okay, if I can get a really big deal, right? How great would that be? So, I mean, it's not all just weird motivations or warped motivations. He wants to accomplish some tangible things with Russia. And finally, Anthony, he's reflexively contrarian. So like if everybody tells him, hey, Vladimir Putin has to be confronted. Vladimir Putin is not going to back off. You can't cut a deal with Vladimir Putin on Ukraine. he tends to kind of want to do the opposite of what he hears. So does that make sense to you? I mean, that's how I view it. I don't think he has anything on him. I don't think there's any, and all of that I think is noise that feeds into, his kind of sense of beleaguerment and insecurities as president. The Mueller investigation, all of that, charges of collusion, it created a really negative atmosphere, in that first year. And I read a lot about that in the book as well.
So, I mean, this is your interview, me interviewing you, not you interviewing me, but I'll just say one thing and then I'll switch to something else. I think it's a money thing. I know this sounds weird, but he loves money and he loves attention. And I think he sees himself as having a moneyed relationship with Vladimir Putin. He wanted to build the Moscow Trump Tower, and he sees Putin as the richest person in the world. And I think it's a money thing. But whatever, that's just me. I agree with you. I don't think they have anything on him. I don't think, and I think it's very simplistic stuff, which, but to me, it's unpresidential. But that's just for me. The United States, because you've looked at our intelligence briefings, the adversarial relationship we have with Russia, what they're doing to foment division in our democracy. You may remember this. You recommended a book to me called Putin's People by Catherine Belton. I don't know if you remember that.
Fantastic book.
You got me onto that book, and during COVID, I read the whole book, and it would be hard pressed as an American president if you read a book like that to say, "Hey, I'm going to be so praiseworthy of Vladimir Putin." I mean, no American president would do that. So, all right, but I know we're limited on time. I just want to go to two quick things, and then I'm going to ask you to respond to a few things. But I want to go to the NATO summit. And I want to go to something that I think you call reflexive contrarianism, where you tell them, don't mention the fact that we could use Venezuelan troops as a military option. And then he goes out to the press and says, well, we could use,
actually, Tillerson is the one who said it. And we're walking out to the press conference. Yeah. And I said to Rex, I said, hey, that's the first thing he's going to say now,
That's part of his narcissism. He has to show you that it can be done on his own. He's a team of one. I'm going to drag myself to the presidency by myself without listening to anybody. And I'm going to run the presidency by myself without listening to anybody. But go to the NATO summit first. I know we have a few minutes left, and I want to get you to respond to a few things.
Okay, so NATO summit is I tell the story in the book, that he hosts President Macron, and at first we're like, man, are these guys going to have a good relationship? I was worried about, but then they got along almost too well, because Macron's kind of bagging on NATO a little bit. The president is also, and I thought, oh, this is not the frame of mind when he's going to NATO. And we were going to NATO to dedicate a 9/11 memorial with a piece of the Twin Towers, and doing it to commemorate the only time that NATO has come to the defense of an attacked nation, us, on 9/11, right? So as we're prepping for the speech over multiple, weeks, in recent days for sure, and, he wanted to put this line in there about, like, if you don't pay up, if you don't pay your dues, which was really investing in the country's own defense to a minimum of the equivalent of 2% of gross domestic product, that we're not going to defend you. I said, hey, Mr. President, listen, you can make the point on burden sharing, but once you say that, the entire narrative is going to be about you not coming to the defense, and you're not going to make the point you want to make about burden sharing. You're going to get in your own way on this. So he was persuaded by that. But then, Anthony, again, at the 11th hour, Stephen Miller comes out, like the head speechwriter and domestic political policy council lead, and he looks at me, and I could tell he was like, afraid that I would get super angry with him or something. It's like, it wasn't me. I swear it wasn't me. And he added this language back into the speech. We're about to get into the beast, the president's car, to go to NATO headquarters. And I'm walking down with the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and I said, hey, you got to get in the car with me and talk him out of this, because it's destructive to our interest. It's destructive to Trump's own agenda. And they're like, oh no, I don't really, we're not going to get. I said, get in the effing car, please. They got in the car. He changed the speech, but now, of course, you've seen this rhetoric, come back during the campaign.
Can't help himself. So all right. So we're here. You're a military person. I'm not going to ask you anything politically. I want to be respectful of that. But you've written a book that people should read, and I think they can draw their own conclusions. But my producer and I, we've got 5 words that we want you to respond to. And since we have 2 minutes left in the podcast, I'm going to say the word. You give me 1 or 2 sentences. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
So when I say the word duty, you say what, General?
I think it's our duty as Americans to do the best for our country to succeed. Certainly as a military officer, your duty is to the Constitution of the United States. And my duty as National Security Advisor was to help the elected president make the best possible decisions.
So subordinate personal interest for the greater good of the country, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. United States. I say the 2 words, United States. You think what?
I think it's past time for us to get beyond the vitriol of our partisan political discourse and the interaction between identity politics and old forms of bigotry, sexism, racism, and reemphasize our common identity as Americans, and also to celebrate, the great gift of being in a country where we have the freedoms that we enjoy. We should celebrate those freedoms and celebrate our common identity as Americans.
Okay, so that's the reunited States. I love that. I got 2 words. We got just a few more. We're going to end it shortly. I say the words White House. You say what?
A privilege to serve there, and a great team. A great team that works there that Americans don't know. I mean, I tried to tell the story at War With Ourselves about not everybody was at war with themselves, and we had a fantastic team on the NSC staff who worked every day to help the president and advance the country's security, prosperity, and influence.
When I think of the White House, I think of like an extended stay motel. I was there very briefly. Okay, I'm kidding. Okay, let's go to the word Trump. I say the word Trump. You say what?
Disruptive, flawed. But not weak, right? Not weak, right. But disruptive and flawed. And the question is, Anthony, I mean, how would you help him if he's reelected? How can anybody, help him again disrupt what needs to be disrupted? But again, I read in the book, the sad thing is, Anthony, he becomes the antagonist in his own story, right?
Right.
He's the antagonist in his own story.
He's become an anti-hero, which is totally unnecessary. He does stuff that's so self-destructive. But let's go to 2024. Your thoughts there?
Okay, 2024. That you're talking about November 5th, 2024.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think it's not it's not a great choice, But I just got to tell you, Anthony, as a military officer, and you've heard me say this, I think the military is getting drugged into partisan politics by both parties, and we got to stop it. And even though I'm just a washed up general, I think if I were to endorse a candidate or something like that, they'd be like,
I don't expect you to do that. Military. I just think
yeah.
So I would say 2024 is a crossroads, because if Trump's defeated, a new center-right coalition has an opportunity to brew up. If he's not defeated, then what he represents in this whole MAGA thing could be transformative to the country, and we may like or dislike it. I'll leave it up to other people to make that decision.
Can I say one thing, Anthony? I just hope that no matter who's elected, that Americans try to help that president succeed. I'll tell you, we've seen like the renewed Russian efforts to undermine the election. Hey, I don't think the Russians give a damn who gets elected. What they really want is to ensure that large numbers of Americans doubt the legitimacy of the result. That's what they really want.
That's what Catherine Belton said in her book, and I believe that. Before you go, I just have to say that you lasted 41.3 Scaramucci's by your own rendition, and since I'm the official scorer of Scaramucci's, you scored yourself properly. So I just want you to know that. But the funniest part about my time in the White House, you invited me to your house. I think it was at Fort McNair. And you said, we're going to have a welcome to the West Wing party. Of course, I got my ass fired before the party, right? So you had the party slated for August 1. I got fired on July 31st. But you're a good sport. I'm a good sport. We had a goodbye from the West Wing party.
That's right.
And Gary Cohn, a couple of my buddies showed up. Yeah. Your wife was there with your beautiful daughters. And it was a great day for me. And it was a sign of good sportsmanship, right? There we all were, cooking burgers, having a beer. I got fired. I never blamed the president for my firing. I own my firing. Yeah. And I appreciate you trying to save me. But I also understand why General Kelly fired me. So there's no ill will anywhere. But the book is awesome, HR. I know you have to go. The title of the book is At War with Ourselves, My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House. It's a great picture of the two of you because I can see the look on your face like, what the F am I getting into? And of course, you had to write a several hundred-page book to describe that. And I admire you a great deal, General. Thank you for being a great American, and thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, Anthony, I admire you. And when I describe you, I often use the word irrepressible, the irrepressible mooch. And and I enjoyed the hell out of that one Scaramucci that you served for, man. It was great. It was great to serve with you.
Well, it was fun for me too, and I consider you a dear friend. So I'm grateful for our friendship.